Before we step inside America's most beloved neighbors' homes, imagine a man who could have lived anywhere, owned anything, but chose simplicity over extravagance every single time. This is the story of Fred Rogers and the humble spaces where he created magic for millions of children. Fred McFeely Rogers wasn't just a television personality. He was an ordained Presbyterian minister, a gifted composer, and a child development expert who revolutionized children's programming. From 1968 to 2001, he produced, wrote, and hosted almost 900 episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, creating every character, writing over 200 songs, and touching the lives of generations. Unlike today's celebrity culture, Rogers lived modestly despite his fame, with an estimated net worth of just $3 million at the time of his death in 2003. His annual salary as chief executive of family communications was a humble $139,000, remarkable considering his show's cultural impact. Rogers came from wealth. His father was president of the McFeely Brick Company, but he chose a life of service over luxury, often donating his salary to charity. The homes Fred Rogers chose tell us everything we need to know about the man behind the cardigan sweater. From his childhood in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, to his family residences in Pittsburgh's Squirrel Hill neighborhood, to his cherished summer retreat on Nantucket, Rogers selected places that valued community, simplicity, and connection. And then there was his most famous residence, the television house that wasn't really a house at all, but a carefully constructed set where he visited his neighbors every single day. Today, we're taking you on an intimate tour of the spaces that shaped one of television's most influential figures. From the brick homes where he raised his family to the cozy set that became a sanctuary for millions of children, let's explore the neighborhoods where Mr. Rogers truly lived. Our journey begins in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania's Laurel Highlands, in the small town of Latrobe, about 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Fred Rogers grew up in a large three-story brick house at 737 Weldon Street, a home that reflected his family's prominent position in the community. His father, James Hillis Rogers, was a successful businessman who ran the McFeely Brick Company, one of Latrobe's most established enterprises. This substantial home was where young Fred spent much of his childhood alone, a shy and introverted boy who was frequently homebound due to asthma. It was in this house that he developed his love for music, beginning piano lessons at age 5. When Fred Rogers married his college sweetheart, Joanne Bird, in 1952, they eventually settled into family life in Pittsburgh's desirable Squirrel Hill neighborhood. Their first family home on Northumberland Street was a beautiful 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom brick residence built in 1921. The Rogers family lived here during the late 1950s and early 1960s, a pivotal time when Fred was working on the Children's Corner and earning his divinity degree from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. This had elegant yet practical features, including 2 fireplaces, 2 sets of French doors, and a stunning library off the dining room. Perfect for a man who would eventually write every script for his television show. The front of the home featured a large patio, ideal for the young Rogers family with their 2 sons, James and John. The backyard provided space for the boys to play, complete with a basketball hoop in the driveway. It was in this house that family life unfolded during Fred's ordination as a Presbyterian minister in 1963 and his early work on the Canadian show Mr. Rogers. As Mr. Rogers' neighborhood began to take shape and the Rogers sons grew older, the family moved in 1966 to a brick home at 1300 Beechwood Boulevard, also in Pittsburgh. This residence served as the family's home base during the crucial years when the national version of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood premiered on February 19, 1968, and began its historic run on public television. The Beechwood Boulevard home witnessed the height of Rogers' creative output. Every morning, he would leave this house to head to WQED studios, where he would write, produce, perform, and create television magic. This was the home he returned to after long days of filming, where he was simply Dad to James and John, not the famous Mr. Rogers, known to millions. The separation between his television persona and his private family life was important to Rogers, who valued authenticity and wanted his sons to have as normal a childhood as possible, despite their father's growing fame. In the 1980s, after their sons John and James were grown, Fred and Joanne Rogers made a significant lifestyle change. They sold their family home and moved to an apartment on Ellsworth Avenue, strategically located near the WQED studios, where Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was filmed. This decision was pure Fred Rogers, practical, unpretentious, and focused on what truly mattered. This modest apartment was where Rogers lived during some of the show's most impactful years, through the late 1980s and 1990s. It was here that he would review scripts at his kitchen table, practice piano, and maintain his disciplined daily routine. Rogers remained in this residence until his death on February 27, 2003, at age 74, having lived his values until the very end. Now, let's step into the home most people picture when they think of Mr. Rogers, the television house from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But here's what made Rogers different from other children's television hosts. He never pretended this was his real home. From day one, he called it his television house, making sure children understood the difference between television and real life. Before the term media literacy existed, Rogers was teaching children to think critically about what they saw on screen. The television house barely changed over more than 30 years of production. It always looked comfortably old-fashioned, with the same familiar elements that became iconic to generations of viewers. Let's take a tour, just as millions of children did every day after school. Every episode began the same way. Rogers would walk through the front door in his work jacket, singing his welcoming theme song. The entryway featured a small closet where he would hang up his jacket and retrieve his famous cardigan sweater, hand-knitted by his mother. The shoe rack held his sneakers, which he would put on to replace his dress shoes. This ritual of changing clothes was Rogers' way of showing children the transition from the outside world to the comfortable space of home. The heart of the television house was the living room, where Rogers would sit and talk directly to the camera and to every child watching. The furniture was comfortable and unpretentious, a simple couch, chairs, and most famously, the trolley bench by the window. This bench concealed the tunnel where Trolley lived when he wasn't traveling to the neighborhood of make-believe. Rogers always made a point to show children that he controlled Trolley with a switch, demystifying the magic of television. There were no secrets here, no attempts to fool children into thinking Trolley operated on its own. One of the room's most curious features was a traffic light, which stood in the corner throughout the series. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't there to remind children to slow down. Rogers simply received it as a gift when the show began, and thought it looked fun and familiar. Sometimes he found ways to use it in episodes, but mostly it was just an interesting decoration that children remembered. After the first year, Rogers introduced a fish tank to the living room. This wasn't just decoration, it was a teaching tool about responsibility. Feeding the fish became part of every episode's routine. Rogers took this responsibility so seriously that once, when he fed the fish without saying what he was doing, a 5-year-old blind viewer's father wrote to him. The girl worried about the fish because she couldn't see whether they were being fed. From that day forward, Rogers always announced when he was feeding the fish, a beautiful example of his attention to every child's needs and his willingness to adapt based on their feedback. The most magical element of the television house was the transition to the neighborhood of make-believe. When Trolley emerged from its tunnel and traveled through the living room, children knew they were about to enter a different world, one of puppets, imagination, and emotional learning. But Rogers never pretended this was real. He showed children how he made Trolley move forward or backward, fast or slow. The sets for the neighborhood of make-believe, featuring King Friday the 13th's castle, the Eiffel Tower, and the homes of various puppet characters, were clearly miniature. Rogers wanted children to understand that imagination was something people created, not magic that happened on its own. As we step back from our tour of Mr. Rogers' homes, what becomes clear is that Fred Rogers' residences were never about impressing anyone. He could have lived in a mansion, collected expensive properties, or flaunted his success. Instead, he downsized to an apartment near his work, spent summers in a modest island cottage, and created a television house that looked like it could belong to anyone's neighbor. But perhaps the most important home of all was the television house that wasn't really a house. In that simple set, Rogers welcomed millions of children, making each one feel seen, valued, and loved. He taught media literacy before anyone else thought it mattered. He fed fish to reassure a blind child. He changed his shoes to show the transition from outside to inside. He showed how Trolley worked because he believed children deserved honesty. That television house became a sanctuary for generations of children who needed to hear that they were special, just the way they were. No mansion could have accomplished what that modest set achieved. Fred Rogers once said, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." In his own quiet way, through his homes and his work, Rogers was one of the greatest helpers of all. If you've enjoyed this journey through Mr. Rogers' neighborhoods, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being our neighbor today.